The bruise on her cheek told a story Luke Carter wasn't sure he wanted to hear. When Emma Whitfield stepped off that stagecoach in Silverdale, Montana, she wasn't looking for love. She was running from hell itself. And Luke? He'd been running from loneliness for 8 years. 2 broken souls, 1 dusty frontier town, and a marriage arranged by strangers. This is their story, a tale of survival, second chances, and the kind of love that heals the deepest wounds. Stay with us until the end, and comment what city you're watching from so we can see how far this story travels. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Luke Carter was mending fence posts on the north pasture when he heard the hoofbeats. He'd been out since dawn, working the land that had been both his salvation and his prison for the better part of a decade. The Montana sun beat down mercilessly, turning the back of his neck the color of old leather, and his hands, calloused and scarred from years of hard labor, gripped the post digger with the kind of mechanical efficiency that came from doing the same task 1,000 times before. He didn't get visitors. Not anymore. The last person to ride out to the Carter Ranch had been Pastor Reynolds, and that was 4 months ago, coming to ask if Luke would donate a steer for the church social. Luke had agreed, as he always did, then watched the pastor ride away with a mixture of relief and something that felt dangerously close to regret. But this wasn't the pastor's steady mare. This was the territorial mail rider, and the young man was waving something in his hand like it was a flag of surrender. "Mr. Carter?" The rider pulled up short, his horse dancing sideways. "Got something for you from back east, Boston postmark. Looks important." Luke set down the digger and walked over, squinting against the sun. His heart did something strange in his chest, a flutter that felt foreign and unwelcome. Nobody wrote to him from Boston. Nobody wrote to him from anywhere. He took the envelope with hands that suddenly felt clumsy. The paper was thick, expensive, and slightly water-stained along one edge. His name was written in elegant script across the front, Mr. Luke Carter, Silverdale, Montana Territory. "Much obliged," Luke said, his voice rusty from disuse. He lived alone, after all. Some days the only conversation he had was with his horses, and they weren't much for talking back. The rider tipped his hat and wheeled his horse around, already eager to get back to town and whatever warm meal and cold beer awaited him there. Luke stood in the middle of his half-mended fence line, holding that letter like it might explode. He should have waited until evening, until he was back at the cabin with a lamp and maybe a glass of whiskey to steady his nerves. But curiosity, that old, dangerous companion, got the better of him. He slid his thumb under the wax seal and unfolded the letter right there, the wind trying to snatch it from his hands. "Dear Mr. Carter, we are pleased to inform you that your inquiry to the Western Bride Agency has been received and carefully considered. After much deliberation, we have found a match we believe will be suitable for your circumstances." Luke's breath caught. He'd written to that agency 6 months ago, in a moment of weakness brought on by too much silence and too much whiskey. He'd been sure they'd lost his letter, or worse, read it and decided he wasn't worth the trouble. A widower pushing 40, living on a remote homestead in the middle of nowhere, with nothing to offer but hard work and harder winters. Miss Emma Whitfield of Boston, Massachusetts, will arrive in Silverdale on Friday, October 13th, via the afternoon stagecoach. She is 26 years of age, of good character, and comes with the highest recommendations. However, we must inform you of particular circumstances regarding Miss Whitfield's situation. The letter went on, but Luke had to stop reading. His hands were shaking. Friday. That was 3 days from now. 3 days to prepare, to make himself presentable, to transform a bachelor's cabin into something that might pass for a home. He forced himself to continue reading. Miss Whitfield seeks a marriage of protection rather than romance. While we trust she will prove a dutiful and capable wife, we must advise you that she comes to Montana seeking safety first and companionship second. She has endured difficulties in her previous circumstances that have left her in need of a fresh start and, most importantly, security. We trust you will provide both. The agency has paid her passage in full. She will arrive with modest belongings and a small dowry of $30. We ask only that you treat her with kindness and patience as she adjusts to her new life. Respectfully yours, Mrs. Margaret Hensley. Western Bride. Agency. Luke read the letter 3 more times, standing there in the wind with the sun beating down and the fence posts waiting. Each time, his eyes snagged on the same phrases: marriage of protection, endured difficulties, safety first. What kind of difficulties? He folded the letter carefully and slid it into his shirt pocket, right over his heart where he could feel the crinkle of paper against his chest. Then he gathered his tools, loaded them onto the back of his horse, and rode home with his mind spinning like a prairie twister. The cabin sat in a small valley, sheltered from the worst of the winter winds by a stand of pines. Luke had built it himself years ago, when he'd still had hope, when he'd still had Sarah. He dismounted and stood for a moment, seeing the place through a stranger's eyes, through Emma Whitfield's eyes. It wasn't much. One main room that served as kitchen, dining area, and sitting room all at once. A small bedroom off to the side, his bedroom, where Sarah had died on a February morning while snow piled up against the windows. And a loft above, accessible by a ladder that he used for storage. The place was clean enough, he supposed. He wasn't a slob, but it was also bare, austere, the home of a man who'd forgotten how to live for anything but survival. Luke spent the rest of that day, and all of the next, in a frenzy of activity that would have been comical if anyone had been there to witness it. He scrubbed floors that were already clean. He washed windows that rarely saw company. He rode into Silverdale and bought supplies with money he couldn't really spare: coffee, sugar, flour, fabric for curtains that he had no idea how to hang. Mrs. Chen at the general store raised an eyebrow when he asked for women's things. "Expecting company, Luke?" "Maybe," he said, and left it at that. The night before Emma's arrival, Luke attempted to bake bread. It was a disaster. The loaf came out of his cast-iron Dutch oven, looking more like a brick than anything edible, hard enough to use as a weapon. He stared at it in dismay, then threw it to his dog, Rufus, who sniffed it once and walked away. "That bad, huh?" Luke muttered. He gave up on baking and focused instead on himself. He trimmed his beard with a knife and his small shaving mirror, trying to remember what he'd looked like when Sarah was alive. Younger, he thought. Less weathered, less alone. He put on his one good shirt, the blue one that Sarah had sewn for him years ago. It still fit, though the sleeves were a bit short now. He looked at himself in the mirror and saw a stranger, a man trying very hard to look like someone worth meeting. Decent enough, he told his reflection, though he didn't quite believe it. Friday morning dawned clear and cold. Luke had barely slept. He'd spent most of the night staring at the ceiling, wondering what Emma Whitfield would look like, sound like, think of him. He'd constructed a dozen different versions of her in his mind, each one dissolving like smoke when he tried to hold on to the image. He rode into Silverdale at noon, though the stagecoach wasn't due until 3. He couldn't stay at the cabin any longer, pacing like a caged animal. Better to wait in town, where at least there were distractions. The town of Silverdale wasn't much to speak of. A main street with a handful of businesses, a church, a saloon, and the stagecoach depot. It had been founded by silver miners 20 years earlier, though most of the silver was gone now. What remained was a stubborn community of ranchers, farmers, and merchants who'd decided that Montana Territory was as good a place as any to put down roots. Luke tied his horse outside the depot and went inside. The clerk, old Thomas Brennan, looked up from his ledger and grinned. "Heard you got a bride coming in today, Carter. Word travels fast in a small town." Luke felt his face heat. Just a woman arriving on the afternoon stage. "A woman from a bride agency ain't just any woman." Thomas chuckled. "You clean up nice, though. She'll be lucky to have you." Luke didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded and took a seat on one of the hard wooden benches that lined the depot wall. The next 3 hours were the longest of his life. Other people came and went. Mrs. Foster, picking up a package from her sister in St. Louis. The Garrett brothers, waiting for mining equipment. A traveling salesman with a case full of patent medicines and wild promises. They all cast curious glances at Luke, sitting there in his good shirt with his hat in his hands, and he could feel their speculation like insects crawling across his skin. At 2:45, he heard it, the distant rumble of hoofbeats and wheels. The stagecoach was early. Luke stood so fast he knocked his hat to the floor. He scooped it up, his heart hammering against his ribs like it was trying to break free. Through the dusty window, he could see the coach rolling down the main street, the driver calling out to the horses. "Here we go," Thomas said, and there was kindness in his voice that made Luke's throat tight. The coach pulled up in a cloud of dust. The driver, a grizzled man named Pete Wallace, climbed down and opened the door. Two passengers emerged first, a merchant Luke recognized from the saloon, and a woman in a green traveling suit who was immediately met by her husband. And then she appeared. Emma Whitfield stepped down from the stagecoach with the careful movements of someone who wasn't sure the ground would hold her weight. She was small, maybe 5 feet and a handful of inches, wearing a gray dress that had seen better days and a dark veil that obscured her face. She carried one small carpet bag and moved like a deer that had just caught the scent of wolves. Luke's feet moved of their own accord, carrying him out of the depot and into the dusty street. The afternoon sun was bright, turning everything into sharp contrasts of light and shadow. Emma stood very still, her head turning slowly as she took in the town, the rough wooden buildings, the mountains in the distance, the endless sky above. "Miss Whitfield?" Luke's voice came out rougher than he'd intended. She turned toward him, and even through the veil he could sense her assessing him, trying to decide if he was safe or just another kind of danger. "Mr. Carter?" Her voice was soft, cultured, with the precise diction of education and breeding. Boston society, he thought. She'd come from a different world entirely. "Yes, ma'am." He took a step closer, careful not to crowd her. "I'm Luke Carter. I got the letter from the agency." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The rest of the world seemed to fade away, the townspeople watching from doorways, the horses stamping, the wind carrying dust down the street. There was only this small woman in her veil and this rough man trying to remember how to be gentle. Emma reached up with trembling hands and lifted the veil. Luke's heart stopped. She was beautiful, in a way that had nothing to do with perfection and everything to do with survival. Dark hair pulled back in a severe bun, large brown eyes that held a wariness he recognized because he'd seen it in the mirror after Sarah died. A face that might have been called delicate, except for the way she held her jaw, tight, braced for impact. And the bruise. It spread across her left cheek like a storm cloud, fading from deep purple to sickly yellow. Someone had hit her, and hit her hard. Luke felt rage kindle in his chest, hot and sudden. But he kept his face carefully neutral, knowing that anger, even anger on her behalf, would only frighten her more. Emma met his gaze steadily, as if daring him to comment, to judge, to turn away. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was steady when she spoke. "I should tell you, Mr. Carter, that I'm not what you might have expected." "None of us are, I reckon," Luke said quietly. She blinked, surprise flickering across her features. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out another letter, this one sealed with the same wax as the one Luke had received. "Mrs. Hensley asked me to give this to you. She said it would explain circumstances." Luke took the letter but didn't open it. Instead, he tucked it into his pocket and held out his hand to Emma. "Whatever that letter says, it can wait. You've had a long journey. Let's get you home." Emma stared at his outstretched hand like it was a foreign object. Luke waited, patient as stone, until finally, slowly, she placed her small hand in his calloused palm. Her skin was cold. He closed his fingers gently around hers. "Welcome to Montana, Miss Whitfield." Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them back fiercely. "Thank you, Mr. Carter." They stood there in the middle of Silverdale's main street, two strangers holding hands while the whole town watched. Pete Wallace handed down Emma's trunk, which was pitifully small, and Luke loaded it onto his wagon. The ride out to the ranch was quiet. Emma sat beside him on the wagon seat, her bag clutched in her lap, her eyes fixed on the landscape rolling past. Montana in October was all gold and rust, the prairie grass rippling in the wind like water. The mountains rose in the distance, snow already capping their peaks. "It's very open," Emma said finally. "That bother you?" "I'm not sure yet." She turned to look at him, and Luke forced himself to keep his eyes on the road. "In Boston, you're never alone. Buildings everywhere, people everywhere. Sometimes you can't breathe for the press of it all. Out here, you can go days without seeing another soul. That sounds..." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Peaceful." "It can be. It can also be lonely." Emma nodded slowly. Perhaps lonely is better than what I left behind. Luke wanted to ask what exactly she'd left behind, what had put that bruise on her face and that wariness in her eyes. But he'd seen frightened animals before. You didn't crowd them, didn't push. You gave them space and time and proved through actions that you could be trusted. So instead he said, "There's the cabin, just ahead." Emma leaned forward, and Luke tried to see it through her eyes. The small log structure nestled in its valley, the barn off to one side, the chicken coop, the garden plot, mostly empty now with winter coming. Smoke rose from the chimney. He'd left the fire banked that morning. It wasn't much, but it was home. "It's lovely," Emma said, and she sounded like she meant it. Luke pulled the wagon up to the front porch and climbed down, then went around to help Emma. She accepted his hand again, though she flinched slightly when he touched her. He pretended not to notice and guided her up the steps. The inside of the cabin was warm and smelled of pine and wood smoke and the coffee he'd left on the stove that morning. Luke watched Emma take it all in. The simple furniture, the stone fireplace, the kitchen area with its cast iron stove and rough-hewn table. "The bedroom's through there," he said, gesturing to the door. I figured you'd want your own space. I can sleep in the loft." Emma turned to him, confusion clear on her face. "Mr. Carter? Luke?" he interrupted. "Please, just Luke." "Luke." She said his name carefully, testing it. "Mrs. Hensley explained that this was a marriage arrangement. I understood that we would be... That is, I expected..." She trailed off, color rising in her cheeks, and Luke suddenly understood what she was trying to say. "Miss Whitfield, Emma." He said her name for the first time, and it felt right on his tongue. "I don't know what happened to you back in Boston, but whatever it was, it put fear in your eyes and marks on your face. I'm not going to add to that. You'll have the bedroom and your privacy and all the time you need. We'll figure out the rest as we go." Emma stared at him for a long moment, and Luke watched something shift in her expression, the wariness easing just slightly, replaced by something that might have been hope. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you do that?" "Because," Luke said simply, "a marriage forced by fear isn't a marriage at all. And I've been alone long enough to know that loneliness is better than sharing a life with someone who's afraid of you." A single tear escaped down Emma's bruised cheek. She wiped it away quickly, straightening her spine. "Thank you," she said. I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything." Luke picked up her trunk and carried it to the bedroom door. "Get yourself settled. There's water in the pitcher if you want to wash up. I'll make us some supper." He left her there and went back to the kitchen, busying himself with coffee and the stew he'd made the night before. Through the thin walls, he could hear Emma moving around, the creak of the bed as she sat down, and then, so faint he almost missed it, the sound of quiet crying. Luke gripped the edge of the counter and closed his eyes. Whatever had happened to Emma Whitfield in Boston, it had been bad enough to drive her halfway across the country to marry a stranger, bad enough to leave marks that went deeper than bruises. He thought of the sealed letter in his pocket, still unread. Part of him wanted to tear it open, to know what he was dealing with. But a bigger part, the part that remembered how it felt to be broken and afraid, decided it could wait. Emma would tell him when she was ready, or she wouldn't. Either way, he'd meant what he said. She was home now. She was safe. And he'd make damn sure she stayed that way. That evening, they sat at the table and ate stew in a silence that was only occasionally broken by the pop of logs in the fireplace. Emma had changed into a simpler dress, still gray, still severe, and pinned her hair back more loosely. The bruise on her face looked worse in the lamplight, purple and angry. "The stew is good," she said finally. "It's just rabbit and whatever vegetables hadn't frozen yet. Still, it's good." She took another small bite, chewing slowly. "I should tell you I can cook. Not well, perhaps, but adequately. Mrs. Hensley insisted all her girls learn basic household skills before placement." "Her girls?" Emma's hands tightened on her spoon. "The women who come to the agency, women looking for a way out." She lifted her eyes to his. "You must have questions." "I do," Luke admitted, "but they can wait until you're ready to answer them." "And if I'm never ready?" Then they'll stay questions. Emma set down her spoon and folded her hands in her lap. For a long moment, she stared at them. Small hands, he noticed, with bitten-down nails and ink stains on her fingers. "I was a teacher," she said finally, "in Boston, at a girls' school. It didn't pay much, but it was enough to rent a small room and have money left for books." She smiled slightly, though there was no humor in it. "I love books. I always have." Luke waited, giving her space to continue. "When my parents died last year, influenza, both of them within a week, I had nowhere to go. My Uncle Thomas took me in. He was my father's older brother, a wealthy man, respectable." The word dripped with bitterness. "He had a business associate, Mr. William Thornton, twice my age, twice divorced, and looking for a young wife to manage his household and bear his children." Luke's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. "Uncle Thomas decided it would be an excellent match. Mr. Thornton had money and status. I had youth and education. It was, he said, perfectly logical." Emma's voice had gone flat, distant. "I disagreed. I told Uncle Thomas I didn't wish to marry Mr. Thornton, that I would rather continue teaching and live independently. I take it he didn't accept that." "No." She touched her bruised cheek absently. "He said I was ungrateful, disobedient, that my refusal brought shame on the family. He convinced me that I had no choice." The way she said "convinced" made Luke's hands curl into fists under the table. "But you got out," he said. "Mrs. Hensley." Emma's voice softened. "She runs the Western Bride Agency, but that's not all she does. She helps women like me, women with nowhere else to turn. Someone told me about her, and I went to her house in the middle of the night with nothing but the clothes on my back and $30 I'd stolen from Uncle Thomas's desk." "That's the dowry the agency mentioned." Emma nodded. "Mrs. Hensley said she'd find me a place out west, somewhere Uncle Thomas couldn't reach me, somewhere I could start over. She matched me with you within a week, said you seemed like a good man who'd treat a wife with respect." She met his eyes. "Was she right?" "I'll try to be," Luke said honestly. "I can't promise I won't make mistakes, but I can promise you'll be safe here. Whatever else happens, you'll be safe." Emma studied him for a long moment, and Luke had the sense he was being measured against some invisible standard. Finally, she nodded. "All right, then I'll try to be a good wife to you. I'll cook and clean and help with the ranch work as I'm able. Emma," Luke leaned forward, "you don't owe me anything. You're here, you're safe, and that's enough." "But the arrangement is whatever we decide it is." He reached across the table, palm up, offering rather than taking. "We're two people trying to build something from nothing. We'll figure it out together. No rush, no pressure, just one day at a time." For the second time that day, Emma placed her hand in his. This time, her fingers were warmer, and they didn't tremble quite so much. "One day at a time," she repeated softly. They finished their meal in a more comfortable silence. Afterward, Luke showed Emma how to work the stove, where he kept supplies, how to latch the door and windows at night. She listened intently, asking occasional questions in that precise Boston accent that seemed almost musical after years of rough frontier speech. When darkness fell completely, Luke lit the lamps and showed her to the bedroom. "There's extra blankets in the trunk at the foot of the bed," he said. "And if you need anything in the night, just call out. I'll hear you." Emma stood in the doorway, her hands clasped in front of her. In the soft lamplight, she looked very young and very tired. "Luke?" she said as he turned to go. "Yes?" "Thank you for everything, for not—" She struggled to find words. "For treating me like a person instead of a problem." Luke felt something crack open in his chest, something that had been frozen solid for 8 long years. "Good night, Emma." "Good night." He climbed up to the loft and lay down on his bedroll, staring at the rough wood ceiling. Below, he could hear Emma moving around, the creak of the bed as she lay down, and then silence. Luke pulled out the second letter from his pocket, the one Emma had given him, and held it unopened in his hands. Mrs. Hensley had said it would explain circumstances, but Emma had already told him everything that mattered. She'd been hurt, she'd run, she'd landed here, in his cabin, in his life. That was enough. He tucked the letter away, still sealed, and closed his eyes. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, learning to share space with another person, navigating the strange territory between strangers and spouses, figuring out how to help Emma heal without crowding her. But tonight, for the first time in longer than he could remember, Luke Carter wasn't alone. And in the room below, Emma Whitfield pulled a quilt up to her chin and stared at the log ceiling of her new home. The bed was harder than she was used to, the room simpler than anything she'd known in Boston. But the door had a lock on the inside, and the man in the loft had promised she was safe. She closed her eyes and whispered into the darkness, "Thank you." Whether she was thanking Luke or Mrs. Hensley or God or just the vast Montana sky, she wasn't entirely sure. But for the first time in months, Emma Whitfield fell asleep without fear. And in the morning, when she woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of someone moving quietly in the kitchen, trying not to disturb her, she realized something remarkable. She was home. Whatever came next, whatever challenges awaited them, she was finally home. Dawn broke over the Montana Valley with the kind of quiet that Emma had never known existed. In Boston, mornings arrived with the clatter of carriages on cobblestones, the shouts of vendors, the endless percussion of a city waking. Here, there was only the whisper of wind through pines and the distant call of a hawk circling overhead. She lay very still in the unfamiliar bed, watching pale light creep across the log walls. Every muscle in her body ached from the long journey, days on trains, then the bone-jarring stagecoach ride. But beneath the physical discomfort was something else, something she almost didn't recognize. Peace. The realization brought tears to her eyes. She'd spent so many nights in her uncle's house lying awake, listening for footsteps in the hallway, for the turn of a doorknob, for whatever new torment morning might bring. But here, in this simple room with its handmade quilt and rough-hewn furniture, she'd slept through the night without waking once. A sound from the main room made her sit up. Footsteps, careful and quiet. The clink of metal on metal, a pot perhaps, or a kettle. Luke was up, trying not to disturb her. Emma rose and dressed quickly in the same gray dress from yesterday. She had 3 dresses total in her small trunk, all of them serviceable and plain. Uncle Thomas had burned her prettier things after she refused Mr. Thornton, saying she didn't deserve finery if she couldn't appreciate a good match when it was offered. She pushed the memory away and pinned up her hair, studying her reflection in the small mirror Luke had hung on the wall. The bruise on her cheek was fading but still visible, a reminder of her last conversation with Uncle Thomas, when she'd finally told him she'd rather die than marry William Thornton. "Than die alone and destitute," he'd said, and struck her so hard she'd fallen. "See how far your pride takes you." But she hadn't died. She'd run, and now she was here, in a place so far from Boston, it might as well be another world. Emma took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and opened the bedroom door. Luke stood at the stove with his back to her, pouring coffee into 2 tin cups. He was dressed for work, worn trousers, a faded shirt, boots that had seen better days. His hair was damp, like he'd dunked his head in the water basin, and she could smell soap and wood smoke. "Morning," he said without turning around. "Wasn't sure when you'd wake. Coffee's fresh." "Thank you." Emma moved into the room, hyper-aware of the domestic intimacy of the moment. She'd never shared morning space with a man before, never navigated the small rituals of cohabitation. "I'm sorry I slept so late. I should have. It's barely past 6. Luke turned and handed her one of the cups, careful not to let their fingers touch. "And you traveled for days. You're entitled to sleep." Emma accepted the coffee and took a sip. It was strong enough to strip paint, nothing like the delicate tea she'd been raised on, but the heat felt good going down. "I want to help," she said. "With the work, I mean. I'm not used to being idle." Luke studied her for a moment, his gray eyes thoughtful. "You ever been on a ranch before?" "No." "Ever milked a cow?" "No." "Gathered eggs, fed chickens, mucked out a barn?" "No, no, and no." Emma lifted her chin. "But I can learn. I'm not afraid of hard work." Something that might have been a smile tugged at the corner of Luke's mouth. "I don't doubt that. But maybe we start small. You settle in today, get your bearings. Tomorrow, we'll see about teaching you the basics." "I don't want to be a burden." "You're not." Luke's voice was firm. "Emma, you just got here. Give yourself a day to breathe. She wanted to argue, to prove herself useful, but the truth was she had no idea where to even begin. The cabin was foreign territory, the vast landscape outside intimidating in its emptiness. In Boston, she'd been competent, capable. Here, she was lost. "All right," she said finally, "but I can at least make breakfast. I told you I can cook." "Can you make it edible?" Luke's tone was teasing, gentle. "Because I tried baking bread 2 days ago and it could have been used as ammunition." Emma felt an unexpected laugh bubble up. "I promise my cooking is better than that." "Then the kitchen's yours." They worked in oddly comfortable silence. Emma found flour and eggs, real eggs, still slightly warm from the chicken coop Luke must have visited at dawn. She made flapjacks on the cast iron griddle, surprised by how different it was from the fancy stove in her uncle's kitchen. Luke watched her work, offering occasional guidance about the heat level, where he kept the maple syrup, how much wood to add to the fire. When they finally sat down to eat, Emma felt an absurd pride in the stack of golden flapjacks between them. "These are good," Luke said after his first bite, and he sounded genuinely surprised. "You expected them not to be?" "I expected—" He paused, choosing words carefully. "I expected a city woman might not know her way around a frontier kitchen. I expected a rancher might not know how to speak in complete sentences," Emma shot back, then immediately regretted it. "I'm sorry, that was—" But Luke was laughing, actually laughing, a sound that transformed his whole face from weathered and remote to something warmer, younger. "Fair enough. I've gotten out of the habit of talking much. Horses don't care about grammar." "How long have you been alone here?" The laughter faded. Luke took another bite of flapjack, chewing slowly. 8 years. My wife Sarah died in the winter of 75. Fever took her." "I'm sorry." Emma meant it. She recognized grief when she saw it, had worn it herself after her parents died. "It was a long time ago." But the way he said it suggested it wasn't long enough. "What about you? The letter from the agency said you were 26. I'm surprised someone didn't snap you up before now." Emma's hand went automatically to her bruised cheek. "There was interest. I just wasn't interested in return. I wanted to teach, to have my own income, my own life. In Boston society, that made me difficult. Out here, that makes you sensible." She looked up, startled. "Really?" "Really. Ranch life is hard. Having a partner who can think for herself, who isn't afraid of work or independence, that's valuable." Luke finished his coffee and stood, carrying his plate to the wash basin. "The women out here are tough as nails. They have to be. You'll fit in fine." Emma doubted that very much. She'd seen the way the townspeople had stared at her yesterday, taking in her Eastern clothes, her bruised face, her obvious displacement, but she appreciated Luke's attempt at reassurance. After breakfast, Luke headed out to tend the animals and mend more fence. Emma spent the morning exploring the cabin, taking inventory of supplies, trying to understand the rhythms of this new life. She found herself drawn to a shelf in the corner where Luke kept a handful of books: a Bible, a farming almanac, and 3 novels with cracked spines and dog-eared pages. One was a collection of Shakespeare's plays. Emma pulled it down and opened it, finding a woman's handwriting on the flyleaf. Sarah Carter, Christmas 1872. All the world's a stage. Luke's wife had loved Shakespeare. Emma traced the faded ink with one finger, feeling an unexpected kinship with this woman she'd never met. They'd both loved books, both ended up in this cabin. Though Sarah, Emma suspected, had come here by choice rather than necessity. She was replacing the book when the door opened and Luke came in, stamping dust from his boots. "There's a storm coming in," he said. "Can smell it on the wind. We'll likely be stuck inside tomorrow." "Stuck?" "Montana storms can be fierce this time of year. If it's as bad as I think, we won't be going anywhere for a day or two." He must have seen something in her face, alarm maybe, or fear of being trapped, because he added quickly, "There's plenty of supplies, we won't starve, and the cabin's solid, we'll be fine." That night, Emma lay in bed listening to the wind pick up, rattling the shutters and moaning around the eaves. In the loft above, she could hear Luke moving around, settling in. The sound should have frightened her. She'd spent months hyper-alert to male presence, to potential danger. Instead, it was oddly comforting. She wasn't alone in the dark anymore. The storm hit just before dawn. Emma woke to the sound of rain hammering the roof and wind shrieking like something alive. She dressed quickly and emerged to find Luke already up, checking the windows and making sure the fire was well stocked. "Is it always like this?" she asked, raising her voice over the noise. "Sometimes worse. We'll be all right, though. This cabin's weathered plenty of storms." He gestured to the table. "Might as well get comfortable. We're not going anywhere today." They fell into an unexpected domesticity. Emma made breakfast while Luke did indoor chores, sharpening tools, mending tack, organizing supplies. The storm raged outside, but inside the cabin was warm and dry. They moved around each other carefully, still learning the dance of shared space. Around midday, the conversation started. It began innocently enough. Luke asked about Boston, about what her life had been like there. Emma found herself talking about the girls' school where she'd taught, about her students and their eager faces, about the library she'd loved, the parks she'd walked through, the narrow streets of Beacon Hill. "You miss it," Luke observed. "Parts of it. Not the parts that mattered most in the end." Emma stirred the soup she'd made for lunch. "What about you? Did you always want to be a rancher?" "Not always. When I was young, I wanted to be a lot of things. A soldier, an explorer, a famous outlaw." He smiled at the memory. "My father had different ideas. He was a rancher in Wyoming, taught me everything he knew. When he died, I sold his place and came here. Wanted to build something of my own." "And did you?" Luke looked around the cabin, his expression complicated. "I built this. Whether it's enough," he trailed off. "I thought it would be. When Sarah was alive, it felt like enough. After she died, it felt like a prison." The honesty in his voice made Emma brave. "What was she like, Sarah?" "Kind, patient. She loved books and terrible jokes and the way the valley looked in spring." Luke's voice had gone soft. "She wanted children. We tried for 5 years, but it never happened. Then the fever came, and suddenly there was no more time for anything." "I'm sorry," Emma said again, inadequately. "She would have liked you, I think. She always said this place needed more people who asked questions." They ate lunch by the fire, the storm still raging outside. Emma found herself relaxing in ways she hadn't expected, letting down guard she'd held up for so long. Luke had a quiet way about him. He didn't push, didn't pry, just let silence exist comfortably between them. "Can I ask you something?" he said eventually. Emma tensed. "Yes?" "That letter Mrs. Hensley sent me, the sealed one you brought. I haven't read it yet." "Why not?" "Because I figured if there's anything in there I need to know, you'll tell me when you're ready." Luke met her eyes. "But I'm curious what's in it." Emma took a breath. "It explains my situation in more detail. About my uncle, about Mr. Thornton, about the night I ran." She touched her cheek again, that habitual gesture. "Mrs. Hensley thought you deserved to know what you were getting into." "And what am I getting into?" "A woman with a powerful family in Boston who wants her back. A woman who technically stole money. A woman who—" Emma's voice cracked. "A woman who might bring you trouble." Luke was quiet for a long moment. Then he stood, walked to his coat hanging by the door, and pulled out the still-sealed letter. Emma watched as he fed it into the fire without opening it. "Luke, what are you—" "I don't need it," he said simply. "You told me what matters. The rest is just details, and none of those details change anything." "But my uncle—" "Your uncle is in Boston. We're in Montana territory. That's about 2,000 miles and a world of difference." Luke sat back down across from her. "Emma, I need you to understand something. You're here now. You're under my roof, which makes you under my protection. And out here, that means something. If your uncle or anyone else wants to cause you trouble, they'll have to go through me first." Emma felt tears building. "Why would you do that for me? You barely know me." "Because you're my wife." He said it matter-of-factly, like it was the most obvious thing in the world. "Maybe not in all the ways that word usually means, not yet, but you stood in front of that stagecoach depot yesterday and put your hand in mine. That means something to me. It means I keep my promises." "What promises? We haven't made any vows." "Haven't we?" Luke's gray eyes were steady. "You came here looking for safety. I offered it. That's a vow in my book. The storm howled outside, but inside the cabin, Emma felt something shift. The fear she'd carried for months, the constant waiting for the other shoe to drop, for kindness to reveal itself as manipulation, began to ease. Not completely, not yet, but enough that she could breathe a little deeper. "Thank you," she whispered. "Nothing to thank me for. It's just what's right." They spent the rest of the afternoon in companionable quiet. Luke taught her how to play cards, simple games with worn decks that had belonged to his father. Emma taught him a song her mother used to sing, laughing at his attempts to carry the tune. The storm raged on, but it felt distant now, separate from the small, warm world they were creating inside these log walls. By evening, Emma's initial wariness had softened considerably. She found herself studying Luke when he wasn't looking, the way his hands moved when he demonstrated shuffling cards, the lines around his eyes that spoke of hard years and harder losses, the unexpected gentleness in everything he did. "Can I ask you something now?" she said. "Fair's fair. Why did you write to the bride agency? A man like you could have found someone locally, surely." Luke was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Finally he said, "After Sarah died, people tried. Widow Henderson made it clear she'd be interested. Mrs. Foster's sister visited from Bozeman, stayed a whole month trying to catch my attention. But I couldn't do it. Couldn't walk into it with everyone watching, everyone remembering Sarah, everyone comparing." "So you wanted someone who didn't know her?" "Someone who didn't know what I used to be," Luke corrected. "When Sarah was alive, I was different, lighter, maybe. After she died, I got hard, forgot how to talk to people, forgot how to be anything except tired. I thought maybe a stranger wouldn't see that, wouldn't know what I'd lost." Emma understood that better than he knew. "And now that I'm here? Now I'm realizing what a damn fool idea that was." But he was almost smiling. "You see it anyway. The hardness, the loneliness. Can't hide it in close quarters." "No," Emma agreed. "But maybe that's not such a bad thing. Maybe we both needed someone who'd see the truth and stay anyway." Luke looked at her then, really looked at her, and Emma saw something kindle in his eyes. Recognition, maybe, or the beginning of trust. "Maybe so," he said quietly. That night, as Emma prepared for bed, she realized the bruise on her cheek had faded to almost nothing. Just a shadow now, barely visible unless you knew to look for it. She traced it with her fingers, thinking about all the invisible bruises she still carried, the ones on her spirit, her confidence, her ability to trust. Those would take longer to heal. But here, in this storm-wrapped cabin, with a man who burned unopened letters and promised protection without asking for anything in return, she thought maybe they could. The next morning dawned clear and cold, the storm blown through and leaving the world scrubbed clean. Emma woke to the smell of coffee and something else, something sweet and yeasty that made her stomach growl. She emerged from the bedroom to find Luke pulling something from the oven. "You made bread?" she asked, incredulous. "Attempted bread," he corrected. "Jury's still out on whether it's edible." But this loaf wasn't brick-hard like his previous attempt. It was golden and fragrant, with only a slightly lopsided shape to betray his inexperience. "It looks wonderful," Emma said. "It looks like what happens when a man tries too hard to impress." But Luke looked pleased nonetheless. "Thought maybe we could have a proper breakfast. Celebrate surviving your first Montana storm." They ate bread with butter and jam, and Emma had to admit it was delicious. As they finished, Luke pushed back from the table. "Ready to learn some ranch work?" Emma's heart jumped. "Now?" "No time like the present, and if you're going to live here, you should know how things work." He stood and held out his hand. "Come on, I'll introduce you to the animals." The morning air was crisp enough to sting, and the world sparkled with moisture from the storm. Emma followed Luke to the barn, acutely aware of how little she knew about this life. But when he showed her how to scatter feed for the chickens, how to speak softly to nervous horses, how to milk the placid cow he called Bessie, she found herself adapting faster than she'd expected. "You're a natural," Luke said after she'd successfully filled half a bucket with milk. "Hardly. My hands are cramping." "That's part of it. You'll build up strength." He showed her how to properly finish, how to thank Bessie with a pat on her flank. "See? Not so different from teaching, really, just requires patience and respect. And significantly more hay. Luke laughed, that warm sound Emma was beginning to cherish. They worked side by side for hours, Luke teaching and Emma learning, both of them finding an easy rhythm. By the time they broke for lunch, Emma's muscles ached and her hands were scratched from handling hay, but she felt useful, capable, like she belonged here in a way she'd never belonged anywhere. Over the next week, they fell into a pattern. Mornings were for chores, Emma learning the endless work that went into keeping a ranch running. Afternoons were for projects, Luke showing her how to mend fences and organize supplies while she taught him about the books on his shelf, reading aloud passages that made him laugh or think, or sometimes just sit quietly. Evenings were for conversation. They talked about everything and nothing, childhoods and dreams, fears and failures, the small observations that made up a life. Emma found herself looking forward to these hours by the fire, when the day's work was done and they could just exist together without roles or expectations. One evening, a week after her arrival, Emma was humming while she washed dishes. She didn't realize she was doing it until Luke spoke. "You sound happy." She turned, surprised. "I suppose I am. Is that strange?" "Not strange, just different." Luke was sitting at the table, mending a bridle. "You seemed so frightened that first day. Now you're humming." Emma thought about it. "I was frightened, terrified actually. I'd spent months being afraid, and then I traveled halfway across the country to marry a stranger. Fear seemed like the only logical response. And now? Now..." Emma dried her hands on a towel and came to sit across from him. "Now I think maybe I'm allowed to stop being afraid. Not all at once. I don't think that's how it works. But a little bit each day." "What changed?" "You did. Or rather, you didn't." Emma struggled to articulate what she meant. "I kept waiting for you to change, to become someone else once I'd settled in, once my guard was down. But you're just you, the same patient, kind man every single day. That's something I didn't know existed." Luke set down the bridle, his expression serious. "Emma, I need you to know something. What your uncle did, what Mr. Thornton tried to do, that's not normal. That's not how men are supposed to treat women. That's just cruelty dressed up in pretty words." "I know that. Intellectually, I know. But knowing and believing are different things. Then I'll just have to prove it every day until believing catches up." He reached across the table, palm up in that familiar gesture. "Deal?" Emma placed her hand in his. His calluses had become familiar now, his warmth no longer startling. "Deal." They sat like that for a long moment, hands clasped, fire crackling, both of them understanding that something had shifted. Not romance, not yet, maybe not ever, but partnership, trust. The beginnings of something that might, given time and patience, become a real marriage. When they finally released hands, Emma stood and moved to the bookshelf. "Would you like me to read tonight?" "What have you got in mind?" She pulled down the Shakespeare. "Your wife's favorite, As You Like It. Seems appropriate, don't you think? All the world's a stage." Luke's face did something complicated, grief and gratitude tangled together. "She'd read that one to me sometimes, usually put me to sleep within 10 pages. Should I take that as a challenge?" "Absolutely." Emma settled into the chair by the fire and began to read. Luke listened, his eyes drifting closed, but Emma knew he wasn't sleeping. He was remembering, making space for both his past with Sarah and his present with Emma, finding a way to honor both without diminishing either. And Emma, reading words about love and disguise and transformation, found herself thinking that maybe Montana wasn't so different from the Forest of Arden. Maybe it was a place where people could become new versions of themselves, where what you'd been mattered less than what you chose to be. When she finished the first act, Luke opened his eyes. "Still awake?" Emma asked. "Barely, but not because you're boring, because I haven't felt this relaxed in longer than I can remember." He stood and stretched. "Thank you for that. It's just reading. It's more than that. It's..." He seemed to struggle for words. "It's making this place feel like a home again, making me feel like something other than just a man going through motions." Emma's throat tightened. That's all I've been trying to do. Prove I can contribute something. You don't need to prove anything, Emma. You being here, helping me remember there's more to life than work and sleep. That's contribution enough. They said goodnight and retired to their separate sleeping spaces, the cabin settling into quiet. But Emma lay awake for a long time, thinking about contribution and belonging, about the way Luke had said home like he meant it. Outside, an owl called in the darkness. Inside, Emma Whitfield smiled and pulled the quilt tighter around her shoulders. She was home. And for the first time in her life, she understood what that word truly meant. Summer arrived like a promise kept. The valley transformed from brown and gold to a riot of green, wildflowers carpeting the meadows in purple and yellow, and the creek that ran along Luke's property swelled with snowmelt from the mountains. Emma had been at the ranch for nearly 2 months, and the rhythm of their days had become as natural as breathing. She woke that morning to birdsong and the distant sound of Luke chopping wood. Through the window, she could see him in the yard, his shirt already darkened with sweat despite the early hour. He'd been up since before dawn. He always was, but now he paused to wipe his brow and look toward the cabin, as if sensing she was awake. Emma dressed quickly in one of the simpler dresses she'd made from fabric Luke had bought in town. Her hands had learned new skills over these weeks, not just ranch work, but sewing and preserving and all the small crafts that kept a household running. The gray dresses from Boston hung in the back of the wardrobe now, relics of a different life. She was making breakfast when Luke came in, bringing the smell of pine and morning air with him. "Sleep well?" he asked, washing his hands in the basin. "Like the dead, I think the work is catching up with me. You've been doing the work of 3 people. Luke dried his hands and came to stand beside her at the stove. "Emma, you know you don't have to—" "I know." She'd heard this speech before. "But I want to. Besides, you do the work of 10 people. I'm just trying to keep pace." He smiled at that, and Emma felt the now familiar warmth in her chest. Luke's smiles had become more frequent over these weeks, transforming his face from weathered and remote to something softer, more approachable. She'd caught herself watching for them, trying to coax them out with terrible jokes or observations about the absurdity of ranch life. They were halfway through breakfast when they heard the sound of an approaching horse. Luke's expression shifted instantly from relaxed to alert, and Emma felt her own stomach tighten. Visitors were rare out here, and in her experience, unexpected visitors rarely brought good news. Luke stood and moved to the window. "It's Sheriff Morrison. Wonder what brings him all the way out here." Emma's hands began to tremble. She set down her coffee cup carefully, not trusting herself to hold it steady. The sheriff. Had someone found her? Had Uncle Thomas somehow tracked her down? "Emma." Luke's voice was gentle but firm. "Whatever this is, we'll handle it together, all right?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. The sheriff was a thick-set man in his 50s with a gray mustache and kind eyes that had seen too much. He dismounted heavily and tied his horse to the porch rail before knocking. "Sheriff?" Luke opened the door, keeping his body partially between Morrison and Emma. "This is unexpected." "Wish it was a social call, Luke." The sheriff removed his hat and nodded to Emma. "Ma'am, you must be Mrs. Carter." The name still startled her. Mrs. Carter. She'd been Emma Whitfield for 26 years, and now she was someone else entirely. "I am," she managed. "Mind if I come in? Got something we need to discuss." Luke stepped back, and the sheriff entered. Emma noticed how Luke positioned himself close to her, a silent show of solidarity. The sheriff noticed too, his eyes flicking between them with an expression Emma couldn't quite read. "Coffee?" Luke offered. "Wouldn't say no." Morrison settled into a chair at the table, his bulk making it creak. "This is fine property you got here, Luke. Looks like you've been making improvements." Emma's been helping. Luke poured coffee and sat down beside her. "What's this about, Sheriff?" Morrison took a long sip, gathering his thoughts. "Had a visitor in town yesterday. Man from back east. Boston," he said. "Well-dressed, well-spoken, throwing money around like it was water." Emma's breath caught. Luke's hand found hers under the table, squeezing gently. "Go on," Luke said. Said he was looking for his niece. A young woman who ran away a couple months back. 26 years old, dark hair, about 5'3". Said her name was Emma Whitfield. Morrison's eyes settled on Emma. Said she stole from him and he wanted her brought back to face charges. The room seemed to tilt. Emma gripped Luke's hand like it was the only thing keeping her anchored to earth. This man have a name? Luke's voice was calm, but Emma could feel the tension in his body. Thomas Whitfield, businessman from the sound of it. Respectable type, or at least that's how he presented himself. And what did you tell him? Morrison set down his coffee cup. Told him I'd make inquiries. Then I came straight here because I figured if there was an Emma Whitfield in my territory, she'd be Emma Carter by now, and there's laws about such things. Luke leaned forward. What kind of laws? The kind that say a married woman is under her husband's authority, not her uncle's. The kind that say if she came here of her own free will and entered into a legal marriage, nobody can force her back against her wishes. Morrison turned to Emma. Ma'am, I need to ask you some questions, and I need honest answers. Emma's throat felt like it was closing. She forced herself to speak. All right. Did you come to Montana of your own free will? Yes. Did Luke Carter force you or coerce you into marriage? No, absolutely not. Do you want to return to Boston? I would rather die. The words came out fierce, surprising even herself. Morrison nodded slowly. And this money your uncle claims you stole? Emma's face heated. I took $30 from his desk, money my father had given him for my care after my parents died. Uncle Thomas spent it on himself and expected me to be grateful for room and board. I took back what was mine to begin with. Your uncle sees it differently. I'm sure he does. Emma's voice shook. Sheriff, you need to understand, my uncle tried to force me into a marriage with a man twice my age. When I refused, he punished me. He said I had no rights, no choices, that I was his property to dispose of as he saw fit. The Western Bride Agency helped me escape. Everything I did to survive. Morrison was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, The bruise on your cheek when you arrived. That from him. Yes. Luke, did you see it? I did. Luke's voice was hard. Saw it the day she stepped off that stagecoach, scared, shaking, looking like she expected the world to hit her again. The sheriff pulled out a small notebook and made some notes. Emma watched his pen move across the paper, each stroke potentially deciding her fate. Here's how I see it, Morrison said finally. You're legally married to Luke Carter. I checked the records myself this morning. Pastor Reynolds filed the paperwork proper. That makes you a citizen of Montana Territory and puts you under your husband's protection, not your uncle's authority. Relief flooded through Emma so suddenly she felt dizzy. However, Morrison continued, and the word fell like a stone, your uncle is claiming theft and flight to avoid prosecution. If he pushes hard enough, gets the right lawyers involved, he could make trouble, federal trouble. What are you suggesting? Luke asked. I'm suggesting you make your marriage ironclad legal. Right now you got a piece of paper from a church ceremony, but if you register with the territorial court, file the proper documentation, there won't be any question about Emma's status. She'll be Mrs. Carter in every legal sense, and your uncle will have no claim. We can do that, Luke said immediately. There's something else. Morrison shifted in his chair. This man, your uncle, he's not the type to give up easy. He's staying at the hotel in town, asking questions, offering rewards for information. Someone's going to tell him about you two eventually. Silverdale's not that big. Emma's relief curdled into fear. He'll come here. Likely. And when he does, you best be prepared. Morrison looked at Luke. You got a rifle? Several. Keep them loaded. I'm not saying there'll be violence, but men like Thomas Whitfield, men who think they own people, they don't always take no for an answer. After the sheriff left, Emma sat at the table with her head in her hands. Luke moved around the cabin, checking the rifle above the door, the shotgun in the bedroom, making sure everything was in order. His movements were efficient, methodical, and Emma realized he'd done this before, prepared for trouble, for violence. I'm sorry, she whispered. Luke stopped what he was doing and came to kneel beside her chair. For what? For bringing this to your door, for dragging you into my problems. Emma, look at me. He waited until she raised her head. This isn't your fault. None of it. Not your uncle's cruelty, not his pursuit, not any of it. You were trying to survive and you did the bravest thing possible. You ran. I'm proud of you for that. Proud? I stole money and fled in the night like a criminal. You escaped a bad situation before it got worse. That's not criminal, that's smart. Luke took her hands. And you're not dragging me into anything. The moment you stepped off that stagecoach and I put a ring on your finger, even if it was just paper at first, I made a choice. I chose to protect you. I chose to stand between you and whatever trouble came looking. But you barely knew me. I knew enough. I knew you were scared and hurt and looking for safety. That was enough. He squeezed her hands gently. And now I know you're brave and funny and terrible at milking cows, but excellent at making bread. I know you hum when you're happy and get quiet when you're worried. I know you read Shakespeare like it's the morning paper and you've got opinions about everything from politics to the proper way to stack firewood. I know all that, and it makes me want to protect you even more. Emma felt tears sliding down her cheeks. What if he takes me back anyway? What if the law sides with him? Then we'll fight it. And if fighting doesn't work, we'll run. I've got money saved, and I know places in these mountains where nobody would find us. Luke's voice was fierce. Emma, I swear to you, on Sarah's memory, on everything I hold sacred, you're not going back to Boston unless you choose to. I'll burn this whole ranch to the ground before I let anyone take you against your will. She believed him. That was the terrifying, wonderful thing. She absolutely believed him. They went into town that afternoon, both of them tense and watchful. Luke had insisted on bringing the rifle, though he kept it hidden in the wagon bed under a blanket. Emma wore her best dress and tried to look confident, though her stomach was in knots. The territorial courthouse was a modest building next to the land office. The clerk, a thin man with spectacles, looked up when they entered. Help you folks? We need to register a marriage, Luke said. Make it official with the territory. The clerk pulled out a ledger and several forms. Names? Luke Carter and Emma Carter, formerly Whitfield. Emma watched the clerk write, his pen scratching across the paper. Each letter felt like another layer of protection, another barrier between her and the life she'd fled. Date of marriage? October 18th, 1883. Efficient? Pastor James Reynolds. The questions continued, methodical and mundane. Where were they born? Ages? Current address? Emma answered automatically, her mind elsewhere. What was Uncle Thomas doing right now? Was he in town at this very moment, asking about her, planning his next move? All right, the clerk said finally. That'll be $5 for the filing fee, and you're officially registered. Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Carter. They paid and left with a copy of the registration. Emma clutched the paper like a talisman. Feel better? Luke asked as they walked back to the wagon. A little. Like I have proof now. Evidence that I'm not his anymore. You were never his, Emma. People don't own people, no matter what the law says sometimes. They were loading supplies at the general store when Emma saw him. Thomas Whitfield stood across the street talking to Sheriff Morrison. He looked exactly as she remembered. Tall, imposing, dressed in an expensive suit that marked him as Eastern money. His face was hard, his posture radiating authority and barely contained anger. Emma froze. Her packages slipped from her hands and hit the boardwalk with a crash. Luke was beside her instantly. Emma, what's wrong? She couldn't speak, could only point with a shaking hand. Luke followed her gaze and his whole body went rigid. That him? Yes. Get in the wagon, now. But it was too late. Thomas had seen her. His eyes widened in recognition, then narrowed with something that looked like triumph. He started across the street, Morrison following with a hand on his arm, trying to slow him down. Emma Louise Whitfield, Thomas called out. I've been looking everywhere for you. Luke stepped in front of Emma, blocking her uncle's path. The name's Carter now, Emma Carter, and you'll address her respectfully or not at all. Thomas stopped a few feet away, looking Luke up and down with obvious disdain. You must be the opportunist who married my niece. How much did the bride agency pay you to take damaged goods? Emma felt Luke's entire body coil with rage, but his voice stayed level. You watch your mouth. Or what? You'll strike me in front of the sheriff? Thomas smiled coldly. Emma, sweetheart, you've caused quite a bit of trouble. But I'm here now, and we can sort this all out. Clearly you've been confused, perhaps influenced by unscrupulous people. Once we get you home and properly cared for, everything will be fine. I'm not going anywhere with you." Emma's voice came out stronger than she felt. She stepped out from behind Luke, forcing herself to face her uncle directly. "I'm married now, legally married." Sheriff Morrison confirmed it. "A marriage made under duress, no doubt. I'll have it annulled." "On what grounds?" Sheriff Morrison interjected. "I've spoken with both parties. Mrs. Carter came here voluntarily and entered into marriage of her own free will. There's no coercion to speak of. She stole from me." "She took money that belonged to her father," Luke said flatly. "Money you were supposed to use for her care. I'd say she just collected a debt." Thomas's face reddened. "You have no idea what you're talking about. Emma is unstable, prone to hysteria and delusions. She needs family care, not to be living in some hovel with a dirt farmer." "I'm a rancher," Luke corrected mildly. "And Emma's not unstable. She's the sanest person I know." "Then why did she run in the night? Why steal and lie and flee across the country if not out of some deranged—" "Because you beat her." Luke's voice cut like a knife. "Because you tried to sell her to a man old enough to be her father. Because you made her so afraid that death seemed preferable to staying. Those aren't the actions of an unstable woman, Mr. Whitfield. Those are the actions of someone fighting to survive." The street had gone quiet. People were watching now, witnesses to this confrontation. Thomas seemed to realize it, and Emma saw him recalculate, shifting his approach. "Emma," he said, his voice softening artificially, "please, your aunt is worried sick. Your cousins miss you. Whatever happened between us, whatever misunderstandings occurred, we can resolve them. Just come home." For a moment, just a moment, Emma felt the old pull. The ingrained obedience, the years of being told she had no choices, no rights. Uncle Thomas was family. He was respectable. Who was she to defy him? Then she felt Luke's hand find hers, warm and solid and real. She looked at him and saw not ownership or control, but partnership, trust, the promise that her choices mattered. She turned back to her uncle. "No." "Emma." "No," she repeated louder. "I'm not coming back, not now, not ever. You tried to force me into a marriage I didn't want, and when I refused, you hurt me. You made me afraid in a place that should have been safe. That's not love, Uncle Thomas. That's not family. That's control, and I'm done being controlled." Thomas's mask slipped, revealing the anger beneath. "You ungrateful little—" "That's enough." Sheriff Morrison stepped between them. "Mr. Whitfield, Mrs. Carter has made her position clear. She's legally married and under her husband's protection. Unless you have actual charges you want to file, and I mean legitimate charges, not family disputes, I suggest you accept the situation and move on." "This isn't over," Thomas said, looking past the sheriff to Emma. "I have lawyers, I have resources. I'll fight this in every court between here and Washington if I have to." "Then you'll lose," Luke said, "because Emma doesn't want to go back, and no court in Montana Territory is going to force a woman to return to a man who abused her. You might have power in Boston, but out here you're just another bully, and we don't take kindly to bullies." For a long moment, Thomas stared at them both. Then he turned on his heel and stalked away, his expensive shoes kicking up dust. Emma's legs gave out. Luke caught her, holding her steady as tremors racked her body. "It's all right," he murmured. "You did it. You stood up to him. He's going to keep coming. Let him. We'll be ready." Sheriff Morrison approached, his expression grave. "That man's got a temper on him. I'd watch your back, Luke, and keep your doors locked at night." "Already planning on it." They drove home in tense silence. Emma couldn't stop shaking, couldn't stop replaying the confrontation in her mind. Uncle Thomas's face, his barely contained rage, the way he'd looked at her like she was property that had misbehaved. Back at the cabin, Luke built up the fire and made tea, pressing the cup into Emma's cold hands. "Drink," he ordered gently. She obeyed, the warmth spreading through her chest. "I'm sorry you had to see that. Had to deal with him." "I'm not. Now I know exactly what we're up against." Luke sat across from her. "Emma, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest." Her heart stuttered. "All right. How do you want to handle this? Morrison's right. Your uncle has resources, connections. He could make things difficult, tie us up in legal troubles for months or years. There's a way to make all that go away, but it means, he paused, choosing words carefully. It means making our marriage real in every sense, not just on paper, but complete. Emma's face heated as she understood what he was suggesting. You mean, I mean, if we were truly married, in all ways, your uncle would have even less legal standing. Consummation makes annulment nearly impossible. It would cement your status as my wife beyond any question. I see. Emma's hands trembled around the teacup. And is that what you want? Luke met her eyes. I want you to be safe. I want your uncle to have no claim on you whatsoever. What I want personally, Emma, I won't lie and say I haven't thought about it. You're beautiful and kind, and I've come to care for you more than I expected. But I won't push. This has to be your choice, made freely, without pressure or fear. Emma set down the teacup. Her mind was racing, her heart pounding. She thought about the last 2 months, the quiet mornings, the shared laughter, the way Luke's presence had become as essential as breathing. She thought about how safe she felt here, how seen and valued. And she thought about Uncle Thomas's face, the way he'd called her damaged goods, the years of being told she was worthless unless she obeyed. If I say yes, she said slowly, it has to be more than just strategy. I can't be used like that, even for good reasons. I would never. I know, that's not what I meant. Emma took a deep breath. I mean that if we do this, if we make this marriage real, it has to be because we both want it. Not just as protection from my uncle, but because we've chosen each other. Because this partnership we've built matters enough to take it further. Luke was very still. And do you want that? Do you choose this? Emma thought about it, really thought about it. Not the fear, not the strategy, but what her heart wanted. And she realized with startling clarity that somewhere along the way she'd stopped seeing Luke as a refuge and started seeing him as a partner, maybe even as something more. I think I might, she whispered. But I'm scared, not of you, she added quickly, of being that vulnerable again, of trusting someone that completely. Then we wait. Luke's voice was firm. We wait until you're not scared, or until you're brave enough to be scared and trust me anyway. Either way, there's no rush. We'll figure this out together. But your uncle can go to hell. We'll fight him with lawyers if we have to, or we'll leave Montana and start over somewhere else. But I won't push you into something you're not ready for just because some pompous fool from Boston thinks he owns you. Emma felt something break open in her chest, something that had been locked tight for so long she'd forgotten it existed. It might have been hope, it might have been love. She wasn't sure yet, but it was warm and real and entirely her own. Thank you, she said. For what? For being patient, for being you. She stood and moved around the table to where he sat. Before she could second-guess herself, she leaned down and pressed a kiss to his forehead. Thank you for making me believe I deserve patience. Luke's hand came up to cup her face, his thumb brushing across her cheek where the bruise had been. You deserve everything, Emma Carter. Don't ever let anyone tell you different. That night, Emma lay in bed listening to the familiar sounds of Luke moving around in the loft. She thought about choices and trust, about the difference between safety and love, about all the ways a person could come home, and she thought about tomorrow, when they would wake up and face whatever came next, together as they had been. As they would continue to be until the day came when together meant something more. Outside her window, the Montana stars blazed in an endless sky. Emma fell asleep watching them, feeling for the first time that the universe wasn't quite as cold and indifferent as she'd believed. Somewhere in town, Thomas Whitfield plotted his next move. But here, in this log cabin nestled in its valley, Emma Carter smiled in her sleep and dreamed of mornings that stretched on forever. The decision came to Emma 3 weeks later, not in a moment of grand drama, but in the quiet of an ordinary evening. She was washing dishes while Luke read aloud from the newspaper he'd brought back from town. His voice was steady and warm, occasionally stumbling over particularly tortured political prose, and Emma found herself smiling at his muttered commentary about politicians who couldn't write a decent sentence if their lives depended on it. This was her life now, this peace, this companionship, This man who made her feel safe enough to smile without fear of punishment. And somewhere along the way, safe had transformed into something deeper, something that made her heart quicken when Luke walked into a room, made her notice the way lamplight caught in his hair, made her want things she'd been too afraid to want before. She turned from the dishes, drying her hands on her apron. Luke looked up from the paper, his expression questioning. "Is everything all right?" "I've been thinking," Emma said, her voice steadier than she felt, "about what you said, about making our marriage real." Luke set down the newspaper carefully, giving her his full attention. "All right. I'm still scared," she admitted, "but I've realized something. I'll always be scared of something. That's what Uncle Thomas did. He made fear my constant companion. If I wait until I'm not afraid anymore, I'll be waiting forever." "Emma, please, let me finish." She moved closer, her heart hammering. "You asked me once if I chose this. If I chose you. The answer is yes. Not because I'm running from my uncle or because I need protection, though those things are true. But because in these months together, you've shown me what it means to be respected, to have choices, to be valued for who I am, not what someone else wants me to be." Luke stood slowly, his gray eyes searching her face. "Are you sure? Because there's no taking this back, Emma. Once we cross this line, we're husband and wife in every way that matters." "I know." She reached out and took his hand, feeling the familiar calluses, the strength tempered with gentleness. "I'm sure. Are you?" Instead of answering with words, Luke cupped her face with both hands and kissed her. It was different from the chaste kiss they'd exchanged at their wedding. This was deeper, full of promise and questions and the kind of tenderness Emma had only read about in books. She melted into it, her hands finding their way to his chest, feeling his heart beating as rapidly as her own. When they finally broke apart, Luke rested his forehead against hers. "I'm very sure," he whispered. That night, Emma Carter became a wife in truth as well as name. Luke was patient and careful, conscious of her inexperience and her fear, and when morning came, she lay in his arms feeling transformed. Not because anything external had changed, but because she'd chosen this. She'd claimed this piece of her life for herself. "No regrets?" Luke asked, his voice rough with sleep. "None." Emma traced patterns on his chest. "Should I have regrets?" "Some might say you could have done better than a Montana rancher. Some would be wrong." She propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. "You're exactly what I needed, Luke Carter. Maybe what I didn't know I needed until I found it." He smiled and pulled her back down against him. "Well then, Mrs. Carter, what shall we do with our day?" "The usual, I suppose. Chores and work and all the mundane things that make up a life." "Sounds perfect." And it was. They fell back into their routine, but everything felt different now, charged with new intimacy, new understanding. Emma caught Luke watching her while she worked, his expression soft in a way that made her blush. He found excuses to touch her in passing, his hand on the small of her back, his fingers brushing hers when they reached for the same tool. 2 days later, they were working in the garden when Sheriff Morrison rode up again. Emma's stomach dropped, fear flooding back instantly. Luke must have seen it in her face because he squeezed her hand. "Whatever it is, we face it together." Morrison dismounted, looking tired. "Got news. Your uncle left town yesterday." Emma's breath caught. "Left? Just like that?" "Not exactly willingly. I might have suggested that Montana Territory wasn't hospitable to men who abuse women, and that if he kept making trouble, certain information about his business practices might find its way to the territorial governor." Morrison's expression was grim. "Did some checking with contacts back east. Your uncle's got a reputation for creative accounting and strong-arm tactics. Nothing anyone could prove in court, but enough that he wouldn't want it examined too closely." "You threatened him," Luke said. "I encouraged him to return home and accept that his niece had made her choice. He took the encouragement." Morrison pulled out a piece of paper. "He did leave this, though. Said to give it to Emma if I saw her." Emma took the letter with trembling hands. Luke stood close beside her as she unfolded it, his presence a silent support. The handwriting was her uncle's precise script. "Emma, you have made your choice, and I wash my hands of you. Do not expect to inherit anything from your father's estate. What little remained has been absorbed into my accounts to cover the costs of your upkeep and the trouble you caused. Your aunt wanted me to tell you that you are welcome to return if you come to your senses, but I see no point in extending an offer you clearly do not deserve. You have chosen a life of poverty and obscurity with a man of no consequence. Live with that choice. I hope it brings you everything you deserve. Thomas Whitfield. Emma read it twice, waiting for the familiar stab of pain, the guilt, the sense of inadequacy her uncle had spent years cultivating. But all she felt was relief, tinged with something that might have been pity. "He's really gone," she whispered. "Looks that way." Morrison shifted his weight. Of course, he could come back with lawyers or federal marshals, try to make trouble that way. But between you and me, I think he's more concerned about keeping his own skeletons buried than digging up yours. After the sheriff left, Emma stood in the garden holding the letter, letting the Montana sun warm her face. Luke waited patiently beside her, not pushing, just being there. "I should feel something more," she said finally. "Anger, maybe, or vindication. But mostly I just feel empty. Like I've been carrying this weight for so long that now it's gone, I don't know what to do with the space it left." "You fill it with something better." Luke took the letter from her hands and, without ceremony, struck a match and set it alight. They watched it burn, the edges curling and blackening, her uncle's words dissolving into ash. "You fill it with the life you choose, not the one he tried to force on you." Emma watched the last fragments float away on the breeze. "I choose this," she said softly. "This ranch, this life. You." Then it settled. Luke pulled her close. No more looking back, only forward. The weeks that followed were some of the happiest Emma had ever known. Summer deepened, bringing long days of work and longer evenings of contentment. She and Luke fell into the easy intimacy of a true marriage, learning each other's rhythms and habits, discovering the small joys of shared life. But it was in September, as the days began to shorten and the first hints of autumn touched the valley, that Emma noticed the changes in her body. The morning sickness that sent her running from the cabin before breakfast, the tenderness in her breasts, the bone-deep exhaustion that made afternoon naps a necessity rather than a luxury. She knew what it meant. She'd taught enough young women to recognize the signs. But the knowing and the accepting were two different things, and for a week she kept the secret, simultaneously terrified and elated, unsure how to voice something so enormous. Luke noticed, of course. He noticed everything about her. "Emma, are you feeling all right?" he asked one morning after she'd returned from being sick in the bushes behind the cabin. "That's the third time this week." "I'm fine. Just something I ate, probably." But he looked skeptical, and that afternoon when she dozed off in her chair by the window, he covered her with a blanket and studied her with an expression she couldn't quite read. That evening, she decided to tell him. They were sitting on the porch watching the sun set, painting the mountains in shades of gold and purple. Luke had his arm around her shoulders, and Emma felt the steady rhythm of his breathing, the solid warmth of him beside her. "Luke, I need to tell you something." "All right." He tensed slightly, as if bracing for bad news. "I'm pregnant." The silence stretched so long that Emma began to worry. She pulled back to look at his face and found him staring at her with an expression of such wonder and fear and joy all mixed together that it took her breath away. "You're sure?" His voice was barely above a whisper. "As sure as I can be without seeing a doctor. All the signs are there." "A baby." Luke said it like he was testing the word, seeing how it felt. "We're going to have a baby." "Are you happy?" Emma had to ask because, despite everything they'd built together, despite the love she felt radiating from him, she needed to hear it. Luke's answer was to kiss her, deep and thorough, his hands gentle on her face. When he finally pulled back, his eyes were wet. "Happy doesn't begin to cover it." "Emma, I thought, after Sarah died, after all those years of trying and hoping and failing, I thought maybe I wasn't meant to be a father, that maybe God or fate, or whatever you want to call it, had decided that wasn't my path. And now? Now I think maybe I was just waiting for you, for this." He placed his hand carefully on her still flat stomach. "For the family we're building together." Emma covered his hand with her own. "I'm scared," she admitted. My mother died when I was young, so I don't have her wisdom to draw on. And childbirth is dangerous, and what if I'm not a good mother? What if— Stop. Luke's voice was gentle but firm. You're going to be an amazing mother. You're patient and kind and strong as hell. And whatever happens, whatever you need, I'm here. We're in this together. They sat on the porch until the stars came out, making plans and dreaming futures, both of them acutely aware of how much had changed in less than a year. Emma thought about the frightened woman who'd stepped off the stagecoach, about how impossible it would have seemed then that she could be this happy, this settled, this loved. The next morning, Luke insisted on riding into town to fetch Dr. Matthews. Emma protested that it was too early, that there was no need to bother the doctor yet, but Luke was adamant. I'm not taking any chances with you or the baby, he said firmly. Let the doc check you over, make sure everything's all right. Dr. Matthews was a weathered man in his 60s who'd been delivering babies in Montana Territory for longer than Emma had been alive. He examined her with professional efficiency, asked questions about her symptoms and her family history, and finally pronounced her healthy and probably about 8 weeks along. Baby should come around early May, if my calculations are right, he said, packing away his instruments. You're young and strong, Mrs. Carter. No reason to think there will be complications. But you rest when you're tired, eat well, and don't do any heavy lifting. Your husband looks like he's ready to wrap you in cotton wool anyway. Luke, standing in the corner looking anxious, had the grace to look sheepish. Just want to make sure she's safe. Understandable, given what happened to your first wife. But lightning rarely strikes twice, son. This one's got different circumstances entirely. After the doctor left, Emma found Luke standing at the window, staring out at the valley with an expression she'd learned to recognize. He was worrying, turning something over in his mind. Talk to me, she said, coming to stand beside him. I'm terrified, he admitted quietly, of losing you the way I lost Sarah, of history repeating itself, of finally having everything I want and having it taken away. Emma took his hand. I'm terrified too, but being afraid won't change what happens. All we can do is be careful and hope for the best. I don't know if I'm strong enough to go through that again. You won't have to. Emma spoke with more confidence than she felt. I'm going to be fine, and so is our baby. We're going to have a beautiful May delivery, and you're going to be there holding my hand and probably fainting from nerves. That startled a laugh out of him. I don't faint. We'll see about that when the time comes. As autumn progressed, Emma's pregnancy became more visible. Her dresses grew tight around the middle, and Luke took her into town to buy fabric for new ones. Mrs. Chen at the general store clucked approvingly and gave unsolicited advice about everything from morning sickness to choosing names. The women of Silverdale, who'd kept a cautious distance from the Eastern bride with the mysterious past, began to warm to her now. Pregnancy was something they understood, a universal experience that transcended background or breeding. They brought preserves and advice, shared their own birth stories, and welcomed Emma into the unofficial sisterhood of frontier mothers. Emma found herself grateful for their company. She'd spent so much of her life isolated, first by her uncle's control, then by the newness of ranch life. Now, sitting in Mrs. Foster's kitchen sipping tea while 3 other women shared wisdom and gossip, she finally felt like she belonged. The first one's always hardest, Mrs. Foster said, pouring more tea. But you've got Luke, and he's solid as they come. He'll see you through. He's already driving me mad with his hovering, Emma said with affection. Yesterday, he tried to stop me from gathering eggs because he was worried I'd strain myself. The women laughed, sharing stories of their own overprotective husbands. Emma soaked it in, this normalcy, this ordinariness that had seemed so impossible a year ago. Winter came early that year, arriving in November with a vengeance. The snow piled high around the cabin, and Luke spent his days ensuring they had enough wood, enough supplies, enough of everything to see them through until spring. Emma's pregnancy progressed, her belly swelling as the baby grew, and she found herself grateful for the isolation. It felt right somehow, this cocooning time before their family expanded. They spent long evenings by the fire, Luke reading aloud while Emma knitted small garments with yarn Mrs. Chen had given her. Sometimes Luke would place his hand on her belly and feel the baby kick, his face transformed with wonder each time. Strong little thing, he'd say, takes after the mother. Or the father, you're not exactly delicate. Fair point. They argued amiably about names. Luke wanted something simple and strong. John for a boy, Mary for a girl. Emma pushed for something with more character, perhaps something from literature or history. We are not naming our daughter Ophelia, Luke said firmly. What about Beatrice? From Much Ado About Nothing. What about Clara? Simple, pretty, and won't get her teased. Clara, Emma tested the name. Clara Rose Carter? Luke's expression softened. Rose was Sarah's middle name. I know, I saw it in her prayer book. Emma took his hand. I don't mind, Luke. Sarah was part of your life, and that's all right. She should be part of our family's story, too. He pulled her close, and Emma felt the tension drain from his body. She understood what he'd been afraid to ask, whether she'd resent Sarah's memory, whether loving them both was a betrayal. But Emma had learned that love wasn't a finite resource. There was room in Luke's heart for both the wife he'd lost and the wife he'd found, just as there was room in Emma's heart for gratitude toward the woman whose absence had made space for her. Christmas came, and with it a fierce storm that kept them trapped in the cabin for 3 days. But Luke had hung pine boughs and made mulled cider, and they celebrated quietly, just the two of them and the baby growing between them. Emma gave Luke a scarf she'd knitted, and he gave her a rocking chair he'd built in secret, smooth wood carved with careful love. For when the baby comes, he said, so you can sit by the fire and rock them to sleep. Emma cried, hormones making her emotions even more volatile than usual. Luke held her and let her cry, understanding that these were happy tears, overwhelmed tears, tears from someone who'd spent so long believing she'd never have this kind of love. January brought bitter cold, February brought more snow, and March finally brought the first hints of spring. Emma was enormous now, her belly so large she couldn't see her feet, and Luke had taken over most of the household tasks despite her protests. I'm pregnant, not an invalid, she grumbled. You're carrying my child, and I'll be damned if I let you wear yourself out hauling water, he countered. Besides, you're giving me a son or daughter. The least I can do is wash some dishes. What if it's twins? Luke paled. Don't even joke about that. But the doctor, when he came for a checkup in early April, assured them it was just one very healthy, very active baby who would probably arrive any day now. Keep her close to home, Dr. Matthews instructed Luke, and send word the moment her pains start. I'll come as quick as I can. The last weeks were a strange mixture of anticipation and impatience. Emma waddled more than walked, her back aching, her ankles swollen. But she'd never been happier. She and Luke had transformed one of the storage areas into a small nursery, filling it with the cradle Luke had built and the tiny garments Emma had sewn. They were ready. More than ready. On a warm evening in early May, Emma felt the first contraction. She was making supper, stirring a pot of stew, when the pain seized her low back and wrapped around her belly. She gasped and gripped the counter. Luke was at her side instantly. Emma, is it time? I think so. Another contraction hit, stronger this time. You should get the doctor. Luke's face went white. I can't leave you alone. You have to. I need Dr. Matthews here, and you're the only one who can fetch him. For a moment, Luke looked torn. Then he helped her to the bedroom, made sure she was comfortable, and kissed her fiercely. I'll be back as fast as I can. You hold on. You hear me? I'm not going anywhere. Emma tried to smile through another contraction. Now go. He went, and Emma lay in the bed they'd shared for months, feeling her body begin the ancient process of bringing new life into the world. The contractions came steadily, building in intensity, and she focused on breathing through them, remembering the advice the women had given her. Luke returned what felt like hours later, but was probably less than one, Dr. Matthews with him. The old doctor took charge immediately, examining Emma and pronouncing everything progressing normally. First babies take their time, he said. Could be hours yet. Best get comfortable, Mrs. Carter. This is going to be a long night. He was right. The labor lasted through the night and into the next day, Emma gritting her teeth through contractions that seemed to tear her apart. Luke stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand, letting her squeeze until his fingers went white, murmuring encouragement even when she cursed him for getting her into this situation. I know, sweetheart. I'm sorry. You're doing so well. Don't you sweetheart me, Luke Carter. This is your fault. I know, I'm terrible. The worst husband in Montana Territory. The worst husband in all of America. Despite the pain, despite the fear and exhaustion, there was love in the room, solid and real and strong enough to carry them through. Finally, as morning sun spilled through the window, Dr. Matthews said the words Emma had been waiting for. "All right, Mrs. Carter, time to push." And Emma pushed, drawing on reserves of strength she didn't know she possessed, focusing on Luke's voice telling her she could do this. She was almost there, just a little more. And then, a cry. High and thin and absolutely perfect. "It's a girl," Dr. Matthews announced, holding up a squirming red-faced infant. "A healthy baby girl with a set of lungs that'll wake the whole valley." Emma collapsed back against the pillows, exhausted and elated and utterly overwhelmed. The doctor cleaned the baby and wrapped her in a blanket, then placed her in Emma's arms. She was perfect, tiny and wrinkled and perfect, with dark hair and eyes that would probably be gray like her father's. Emma stared at her daughter, at this miracle they'd created, and felt her heart crack wide open with a love so fierce it was almost frightening. "Hello, Clara Rose," she whispered. "We've been waiting for you." Luke was crying openly now, tears streaming down his face as he looked at his wife and daughter. "She's beautiful. Emma, she's perfect. Do you want to hold her?" He nodded, unable to speak, and Emma carefully transferred the baby into his arms. Luke held Clara like she was made of glass, his big work-roughened hands infinitely gentle. The baby squirmed and made small mewling sounds, already rooting for food. "Welcome home, little one," Luke said, his voice breaking. "Welcome home." Dr. Matthews stayed for several hours, making sure both Emma and the baby were stable before he finally packed his bag and prepared to leave. Luke walked him to the door, pressing payment into his hands despite the doctor's protests. "You brought my daughter safely into the world," Luke said. "That's worth more than money, but it's all I have to give." The doctor clasped his shoulder. "You've got yourself a fine family, Luke Carter. Congratulations." After he left, the cabin settled into a quiet that felt sacred. Emma lay in bed with Clara nursing at her breast, marveling at how instinctively the baby knew what to do. Luke sat beside them, unable to take his eyes off his daughter. "She has your nose," Emma said softly. "Poor thing. That's the Carter curse." But Luke was smiling. "She's going to be beautiful, though. Takes after her mother that way." "Flatterer? Truth teller." He leaned over and kissed Emma's forehead. "Thank you. For her. For everything. For choosing me. Choosing this life." Emma felt tears prick her eyes again. "I should be thanking you. A year ago, I was running for my life. Now I'm here with you and our daughter, and I've never been happier." Clara finished nursing and fell asleep in Emma's arms, her tiny face peaceful. Luke carefully took her and carried her to the cradle he'd built, settling her in with infinite gentleness. They both stood over the cradle for a long moment, watching her breathe. "I never thought I'd have this again," Luke whispered. "After Sarah died, after all those years of hoping, I thought maybe I wasn't meant to be a father." "You're meant for this, Luke. You were always meant for this." The first weeks with Clara were exhausting and exhilarating in equal measure. Emma had never been so tired in her life, between the night feedings and the constant care a newborn required. But she'd also never been so content. Luke was an attentive father, changing diapers without complaint, walking the floor at 3 a.m. when Clara wouldn't settle, singing off-key lullabies that somehow worked better than Emma's more melodious attempts. "She likes your voice," Emma said one night, watching him pace with their fussy daughter. "She has terrible taste already." But Luke was smiling as Clara quieted against his chest, lulled by his rumbling voice and steady heartbeat. The women of Silverdale came to visit, bringing food and baby clothes and advice both wanted and unwanted. Mrs. Foster cooed over Clara and declared her the prettiest baby in the territory. Mrs. Chen brought tiny knitted booties and showed Emma how to swaddle properly. Even Widow Henderson, who'd once had designs on Luke herself, stopped by with a basket of preserves and genuine congratulations. "You've made him happy again," she told Emma privately. "That's worth more than any hurt pride on my part." Emma appreciated the kindness more than she could say. These women had accepted her, embraced her, made her part of their community. She was no longer the scared bride from Boston with the suspicious past. She was Emma Carter, Luke's wife, Clara's mother, one of them. Spring turned to summer, and Clara grew from a tiny newborn into a chubby, alert baby who smiled at her parents and grabbed at anything within reach. Luke would hold her up to see the horses, introduce her to the chickens, tell her stories about the ranch she'd grow up on. "She's too young to understand," Emma laughed, watching him explain the proper way to mend a fence to their 3-month-old daughter. "Never too early to start her education. Besides, she's brilliant. Look at how she's studying that fence post. She's drooling on it. Brilliant drooling. Very advanced for her age." Emma loved these moments. The easy domesticity, the shared laughter, the family they'd built from nothing. Sometimes she'd catch herself in the middle of an ordinary moment, hanging laundry while Clara napped in a basket nearby, or cooking dinner while Luke played with their daughter on the floor, and be overwhelmed by the sheer normalcy of it all. This was what she dreamed of in those dark days in Boston. This peace, this love, this life chosen freely rather than forced upon her. In July, a letter arrived that threatened to shatter that peace. Luke brought it back from town, his expression carefully neutral as he handed it to Emma. The return address was Boston, but the handwriting wasn't her uncle's. It was her aunt's, Aunt Margaret, Uncle Thomas's wife, who'd always been kind in small, secret ways. Emma's hands shook as she opened it. "Dear Emma, I hope this letter finds you well and happy in your new life. I wanted to write sooner, but Thomas forbade it. However, recent events have made his opinions somewhat less relevant to my daily decisions. Your uncle suffered a stroke 3 months ago. He survived, but his speech is impaired and his right side partially paralyzed. The doctors say he may improve with time, but he will never fully recover. The business has been taken over by his partners, and we've had to sell the house to pay debts I didn't know existed. I tell you this not to garner sympathy, but to give you closure. Thomas cannot hurt you anymore, Emma. He can barely feed himself, let alone chase you across the country. You are free of him in every way that matters. I also wanted you to know that I never approved of what he did to you. I should have been braver, should have stood up for you. I am ashamed that I did not. You deserved better from your family, and I failed you. If you wish to write back, I would welcome it. If you prefer to leave the past buried, I understand that too. Either way, I wish you joy in your new life. I hope you have found the happiness you were denied here. With love and regret, Aunt Margaret. Emma read the letter 3 times, her emotions churning. Relief that Uncle Thomas could no longer threaten her. Sorrow for her aunt, who'd been trapped in her own way. Anger at the years of control and fear. And underneath it all, a strange sense of closure. Luke had been watching her face. Bad news? My uncle had a stroke. He's incapacitated. Emma folded the letter carefully. He can't hurt me anymore. Good. Luke's voice was flat, uncompromising. I won't pretend to feel sorry for him. Neither will I. But my aunt... Emma looked down at Clara, sleeping peacefully in her cradle. She says she failed me, that she should have protected me. She's right. She should have. I know, but I also understand how hard it is to stand up to someone like Uncle Thomas, how fear can paralyze you. Emma took a deep breath. I think I want to write back, not to forgive everything, but to, I don't know, let her know I survived, that I'm happy. Luke came to stand beside her, his hand on her shoulder. Whatever you decide, I support it. This is your family, your history. You get to choose how to handle it. That afternoon, while Clara napped and Luke worked in the barn, Emma sat down to write. It took several attempts to find the right words, to strike the balance between honesty and compassion. Dear Aunt Margaret, thank you for your letter. I am indeed well and happy. I have married a good man and given birth to a beautiful daughter. We live on a ranch in Montana Territory, and though the life is hard, it is mine to choose. That makes all the difference. I understand that standing up to Uncle Thomas was difficult. I do not pretend his stroke brings me joy, but I cannot mourn the loss of his power over me. You say you failed me, and perhaps you did. But I also failed myself for years by not running sooner. We all do what we must to survive. I wish you well in your new circumstances. If your situation becomes dire, write to me and I will send what help I can. Not because I owe Uncle Thomas anything, but because you showed me small kindnesses when you could. I am Emma Carter now, and I am home. Yours, Emma. She sealed the letter and set it aside to mail the next time they went to town. Luke found her standing at the window, watching the valley shimmer in the summer heat. Feel better? He asked. I do, actually, like I've closed a door that needed closing. Emma turned to him. I spent so long afraid of my uncle, of his power over me, and now he's just a sick old man who can't hurt anyone anymore. It feels anticlimactic. Life's like that sometimes. The monsters turn out to be mortal after all. Clara began to fuss, and Emma went to tend to her. As she lifted their daughter, breathing in that sweet baby smell, she felt the last vestiges of fear dissolve. Uncle Thomas was her past. This, Luke, Clara, the ranch, the life they were building, this was her present and her future. As summer progressed, the Carter Ranch thrived. Luke had hired a young man from town to help with the heavier work, which gave him more time to spend with Emma and Clara. They took the baby on walks around the property, Luke pointing out landmarks and telling stories, Emma watching her daughter's eyes try to focus on the big Montana sky. One evening in August, they were sitting on the porch watching the sunset, Clara asleep in Emma's arms, when Luke said, I've been thinking. Dangerous habit. He smiled but continued. I want to expand the ranch, buy more cattle, maybe some sheep, build a proper barn, make this place something we can be proud of, something we can pass down to Clara and whatever other children we have. Other children? Emma raised an eyebrow. Let me recover from this one first. Fair enough, but I'm serious about the expansion. I've got some money saved, and with beef prices what they are, I think we could do well, better than just scraping by. Emma studied his face in the fading light. She saw ambition there, but also hope. The hope of a man who'd spent years just surviving and was finally ready to start living again. Then let's do it, she said. Let's build something amazing. Over the next year, the ranch transformed. Luke bought more land from a retiring neighbor, expanded the herd, built a barn that was the envy of the valley. Emma managed the household and cared for Clara while also helping with the books, her education finally useful in ways Uncle Thomas never intended. She tracked expenses and income, negotiated prices with buyers, proved herself as capable in business as she was in domestic matters. Clara grew from a baby into a curious toddler who followed her father everywhere, her chubby legs trying to keep pace with his long strides. Luke was endlessly patient with her, teaching her the names of animals, letting her help with chores that she mostly hindered, telling her stories that made her giggle. You're spoiling her, Emma said one afternoon, watching Luke let Clara ride on his shoulders while he fed the horses. That's a father's job. She's going to be impossible when she's older. Good. The world's already got enough women who make themselves small to please others. He swung Clara down and tickled her, eliciting shrieks of laughter. My daughter's going to be bold and brave and know her own mind. Emma's heart swelled. This was the life she'd dreamed of but never thought she'd have. A partner who valued strength over submission, who wanted their daughter to be fierce rather than decorative. That winter was harsh, but they weathered it together, the three of them cocooned in the cabin while snow piled high outside. Clara took her first steps in front of the fireplace in January, toddling from Luke to Emma and back again, both parents cheering like she'd accomplished something miraculous. She's walking, Luke said, as if Emma hadn't witnessed the same moment. Our daughter is walking. Next she'll be running, and then we'll never catch her. But they did catch her, again and again, scooping her up for hugs and kisses, marveling at each new development. First words came in February. Dada, first, which made Luke insufferably smug, then Mama, a week later, which evened things out. Spring arrived again, marking 2 full years since Emma had stepped off that stagecoach. She woke one morning to find Luke already up, standing by the window with Clara in his arms, both of them watching the sunrise paint the valley gold. What are you two doing? Emma asked, pulling a shawl around her shoulders. Showing Clara where she comes from. Luke turned, his expression soft. I was thinking about the day you arrived. How terrified I was that you'd take one look at this place and want to leave. How sure I was that I couldn't possibly be enough for someone like you. Someone like me? Educated, refined, beautiful. You could have had anyone, Emma. You could have gone anywhere. Emma crossed to them and put her arm around Luke, the three of them framed in the window like a portrait. I went exactly where I needed to be. I found exactly who I needed to find. Clara squirmed, wanting down, and they let her toddle off to play with her wooden blocks. Luke pulled Emma close, his arms around her waist, his chin resting on her head. I love you, he said. I don't say it enough, but I do. I love you more than I thought it was possible to love someone. Emma turned in his arms to face him. I love you too. You saved my life, Luke Carter, not just by taking me in, but by showing me what life could be when you're not afraid. You gave me a home, a family, a future. You gave me myself. They kissed, soft and sweet, until Clara tugged on Luke's pant leg, demanding attention. They laughed and scooped her up between them, this perfect little person they'd created together. The day passed like so many others, filled with work and laughter, with the small dramas and joys that made up a life. That evening, after Clara was asleep, Emma and Luke sat on the porch, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. Do you ever miss Boston? Luke asked. The culture, the society, all those things I can't give you? Emma thought about it honestly. Sometimes I miss the libraries, the bookshops, the symphony. But Luke, I'd give up all of that 1,000 times over to keep this, to keep you and Clara and this life we've built. Even with all the hard work, the isolation, the winters, especially because of those things, because they're challenges we face together, because they're part of the life I chose, not the life someone else chose for me. She took his hand. In Boston, I was never free. I was always someone's niece, someone's intended victim, someone's problem. Here, I'm just Emma, your wife, Clara's mother, a rancher's partner. I'm myself, fully and completely, for the first time in my life. Luke squeezed her hand. You know what I think? What? I think we should have more children. Fill this house with noise and chaos and love. Emma laughed. Now you want more? After telling me to recover from the first one? You've recovered. It's been 2 years. Besides, Clara needs siblings, someone to boss around. She already bosses you around. That's different. She's got me wrapped around her tiny finger. A brother or sister would keep her humble. Emma turned to look at him, seeing the hope in his eyes, the future he was imagining. All right, she said, let's fill this house with children. Let's build a family so big and loud that everyone in the valley knows the Carters have arrived. Luke pulled her onto his lap, and Emma settled against him, feeling his heart beat steadily beneath her ear. Above them, the Montana sky stretched endlessly, stars scattered like diamonds across black velvet. Somewhere in the house, Clara slept peacefully, dreaming whatever dreams filled the minds of 2-year-olds. And here on the porch, Emma and Luke held each other and dreamed of the future, of more children, of the ranch growing, of growing old together under this vast sky. 3 years later, Clara had 2 younger brothers, Daniel and Samuel, born 16 months apart, and the Carter household was indeed full of noise and chaos. Emma spent her days managing 3 small children, somehow also finding time to help Luke with ranch business and serve on the committee for Silverdale's new school. The ranch had prospered beyond their initial dreams. Luke employed 4 full-time hands now, and their herd was one of the largest in the valley. They'd built an addition onto the cabin, turning it into a proper house with separate bedrooms for the children and even a small library where Emma kept her growing collection of books. One afternoon in early autumn, Emma was in the kitchen making preserves while the children played outside under Luke's watchful eye. Through the window, she could see Clara showing her brothers how to feed the chickens, her 7-year-old confidence a stark contrast to their toddling uncertainty. She heard a horse approach and looked up to see Sheriff Morrison riding in. Her stomach no longer clenched at the sight of him. These days, his visits were usually social, stopping by for coffee and to admire how much the children had grown. But today he looked serious. Emma wiped her hands and went outside, Luke already walking over to meet the sheriff. The children sensed the change in mood and quieted, Clara gathering her brothers close to her in a protective gesture that made Emma's heart ache with pride. "Sheriff," Luke greeted him, "what brings you out?" Morrison dismounted and removed his hat, nodding to Emma. "Mrs. Carter, Hate to bother you folks, but I thought you'd want to know. Got word from Boston yesterday. Thomas Whitfield died 2 weeks back. Pneumonia. Emma felt the words wash over her like water. Her uncle was dead. The man who'd controlled and hurt her, who'd driven her halfway across the country to escape him, was gone. She waited for some emotion, relief, grief, vindication. But all she felt was a distant sort of peace, like the ending of a story she'd stopped reading years ago. "Thank you for telling us," she said quietly. "There's more. His widow, your Aunt Margaret, she's coming west. Says she's got nothing keeping her in Boston anymore and wants to start fresh. Asked if she might settle near here, maybe see you if you're willing." Emma looked at Luke, who gave a small nod. "Your choice," his eyes said. "Tell her she's welcome, Miss," Emma said. "We have room for guests, and I think I'd like to see her, to show her what I've built." After Morrison left, Luke sent the children inside with instructions to play quietly, then took Emma's hand and led her down to the creek that ran through their property. They sat on the bank, feet dangling in the cool water, while Emma processed the news. "How do you feel?" Luke asked. "Like a door I'd already closed just got locked." Emma watched the water flow past, constant and unchanging. "He can't hurt me anymore, not even in my nightmares. He's just gone." "And your aunt coming here?" "I'm curious, nervous maybe, but not afraid. I'm not that frightened girl anymore, Luke. I haven't been for a long time." He put his arm around her, and Emma leaned into him, feeling the solid warmth of his presence. This was her anchor now, not fear or obligation, but love freely given and received. Margaret Whitfield, no longer using her married name, Emma discovered, arrived in Silverdale a month later. She was thinner than Emma remembered, grayer, with lines of worry etched deep around her eyes. But when she smiled at Emma on the train platform, there was genuine warmth there. "You look wonderful," Margaret said, taking in Emma's appearance. The healthy glow, the confident posture, the expensive but practical dress. "Montana agrees with you." "It does." Emma gestured to where Luke waited with the children. "Come meet my family." She made introductions, watching her aunt's face as she met Luke, clearly surprised by his gentle courtesy, and the children, who were shy at first but gradually warmed to this new grandmother figure. Clara especially took to Margaret, perhaps sensing a kindred spirit in this woman who'd also survived Thomas Whitfield's control. Over the next weeks, Margaret settled into a small house in Silverdale and became a regular presence in the Carter household. She and Emma developed a relationship built not on the past, but on the present, sharing recipes, minding children, talking about books and hopes and the strange paths life took. One evening, after the children were asleep, Margaret and Emma sat on the porch while Luke worked in the barn. "I need to tell you something," Margaret said. "An apology, really, though I know it's years too late. Aunt Margaret, please let me say this." She took a breath. "I knew what Thomas was doing to you, the control, the manipulation, the violence. I knew and I did nothing. I told myself I was powerless, that speaking up would only make things worse. But the truth is, I was afraid of him. Afraid of losing my comfortable life, afraid of what defying him would cost me." "I understand that fear," Emma said quietly. "I lived with it for years. But you found the courage to run, to choose yourself, even when it meant losing everything familiar. I never had that courage." Margaret's voice cracked. "And then Thomas had his stroke, and suddenly I was free. But it was too late to help you, too late to be the aunt you deserved." Emma reached over and took her aunt's hand. "You're here now. That's what matters. Can you forgive me?" Emma thought about it, really thought about it, about the years of silence, the nights she'd cried herself to sleep wishing someone would save her, the bruises and fear and desperate escape. She thought about how easy it would be to hold on to that anger, to let it poison this new relationship. And then she thought about Luke teaching her that forgiveness wasn't about forgetting, but about choosing not to let the past control the present, about Clara and her brothers, about the life she'd built, about the woman she'd become. "I forgive you," she said, "not because what happened was okay, but because holding on to anger hurts me more than it hurts you. I choose to let it go." Margaret wept then, and Emma held her, Two women who'd both been victims of Thomas Whitfield's cruelty, both finally free to write their own stories. The years continued to pass, each one building on the last. The Carter Ranch became legendary in the valley, known for its quality cattle, fair treatment of workers, and the family who'd built it from nothing. Luke was elected to the Territorial Council, his voice advocating for education and women's rights, surprising those who'd expected a typical frontier rancher. Emma continued to be his partner in all things, her education and intelligence finally valued rather than scorned. She started a lending library in Silverdale, personally selecting books and teaching anyone who wanted to learn to read. Her children grew strong and confident, Clara showing signs of her mother's intellect and her father's steadiness, the boys rambunctious and loving in equal measure. Margaret became an integral part of their family, the grandmother the children adored and Emma had never had. She opened a small dress shop in town and built a life of her own choosing, finally understanding what Emma had fled across the country to find. One evening, nearly 10 years after Emma had first arrived in Montana, she and Luke stood on their porch watching their children play in the yard. Clara, now 12, was teaching her brothers to dance while Margaret played the piano through the open window. The scene was domestic, ordinary, and absolutely perfect. "Do you ever regret it?" Luke asked. "Answering that advertisement from the bride agency? Coming all this way to marry a stranger?" Emma looked at him. This man who'd saved her life by treating her like a person rather than property, who'd shown her what love looked like when it was given freely rather than demanded. She saw the gray in his hair, the lines around his eyes, the hands that had held her through births and storms and every challenge they'd faced. "Not for one single second," she said. "You? My only regret is not finding you sooner." Luke pulled her close. "But maybe we needed those hard years. Maybe we needed to become who we were before we could appreciate what we'd found." Emma nodded against his chest, listening to his heartbeat, feeling the evening breeze carry the sound of their children's laughter. She thought about that frightened woman who'd stepped off the stagecoach a decade ago, about how impossible this happiness would have seemed then. But it wasn't impossible. It was real, built day by day through choice and effort and love. It was the life she'd fought for, the family she'd chosen, the home she'd created from scratch. Clara looked up from her dancing and waved at her parents. Emma waved back and Luke called out encouragement, and the moment crystallized into something Emma knew she'd remember forever. This perfect evening, this perfect life, these perfect people she loved more than breath itself. Later that night, after the children were asleep and Margaret had returned to town, Emma and Luke lay in bed talking quietly, as they'd done countless nights before. "Do you remember what you said to me that first day?" Emma asked. "When I got off the stagecoach?" "I said a lot of things, most of them probably foolish. You said, 'You're not alone now.'" Luke smiled in the darkness. "I remember. It wasn't just true then, it's true every day. I'm not alone and neither are you. We have each other, we have our children, we have this life we built together. We're not alone, Luke. Not ever again." He pulled her closer, his arms around her, and Emma felt the rightness of it all. The journey from fear to love, from running to home, from surviving to truly living. Outside their window, the Montana sky stretched forever, stars blazing in the darkness. Inside the house, 3 children slept peacefully, dreaming of adventures and tomorrows. And in the bed they'd shared for a decade, Emma and Luke Carter held each other close and gave thanks for the day they'd both been brave enough to reach for something better. The promise they'd made to each other, spoken and unspoken, had been kept. They'd built a home not just of wood and nails, but of love and trust and unwavering partnership. They'd created a family, a legacy, a life worth living. And as Emma drifted off to sleep, safe in her husband's arms, she knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. The frightened bride from Boston was gone, transformed into Emma Carter, rancher's wife, mother, community leader, and most importantly, a woman who'd claimed her own freedom and built something beautiful with it. She was home, she was loved, she was free, and she was never, ever alone.